The condition of the corpse hit my sanity like a hammer to the teeth. I'd seen dozens of dead bodies, most of them in bad shape, but this one made my gut wrench and my mind twist. I kept glancing around, hoping to see that I was in a nightmare that I could wake from, and that this grotesquerie at my feet wasn't real. But I was not asleep, and the corpse before me was part of a fallen world that rejected sanity like a drug addict rejected rehab. I had to make sense of what I was looking at, or I'd end up at Morningstar Sanitarium, grinning like an idiot in the corner of a padded cell. I was beginning to think that wouldn't be so bad. 3 meals and happy pills and a nice comfy straitjacket was beginning to sound pretty good to me. I was standing in the middle of an alley between Romero's Comics and Games and Sabbath Black's Records and Tapes, which was a new music store that just went in. As the name suggests, Sabbath Black is the owner. Pretty sure that's not his real name, but that's what he went by when he was the bass player in a metal band called Headless Cross. Everyone in that band but Sabbath had been murdered in a mansion they'd rented in New Orleans while recording their 5th album. A friend of mine worked that case. He said the bodies had been mutilated and sacrificed upon an altar made of human bones. Sabbath had been found tied to a cross in a copse of woods on the property. At the time, he was completely out of his mind, and when he calmed down, he refused to tell what happened in that mansion. And he hasn't said a word about it to this day. Though his backstory is dark, Sabbath's a pretty cool guy and knows how to get his hands on some extremely rare recordings. At that moment, I wished I was inside flipping through all that vinyl. It would be great to find a record from my youth that took my mind to simpler, more innocent times. I would have preferred anything over what I was looking at. The corpse had been that of Delbert Suggs, a homeless man that everyone in town knew. He had been a strange bird that liked his hooch and kept a pet rat on a leash. But now, his body was somehow fused with the bricks in the wall. It's hard to explain what I mean. The closest I can get to it is that it looked like the bricks and his body had melted into each other. The bricks looked surprisingly organic where they fused into his torso, arms, and legs. His face was a distorted horror. It was warped and twisted and in some places defined by the hard edges of the bricks. But his mouth was open in a silent scream. As disturbing as that was, it was made worse by the fact that his entrails had fallen onto the ground and melted into the pavement. The viscera looked fossilized, but I've never seen a fossil bleed. Blood oozed from the entrails on the ground and from the body on the wall. Sheriff Cotton Mosley stood beside me, careful not to step into poor Delbert's remains. He shined the flashlight on the scene because it was 1 a.m. and the only light in the alley came from a time-yellowed bulb in a fixture above the side entrance of the comic shop. "What do you make of it?" Cotton asked. I shook my head. No clue. That was a lie. Instinct told me I might know what was going on, but my mind had not yet caught up to my gut. Some faint idea wriggled in the back of my mind like a graveyard worm. But it's clear he was alive when whatever this is happened to him. In fact, I think he was alive for at least a minute or so after. Cotton tilted back his Stetson. Damn, I can't even imagine the pain. How can you tell? I pointed to Delbert's left arm. It poked out at the shoulder from the bricks. Look at his fingernails. Cotton pointed the light at Delbert's hand. Dear God. Delbert's fingertips were raw and bleeding and covered with reddish dust. Yeah, I grunted. He was clawing at the bricks. Cotton hesitated a moment as he absorbed that piece of information. One of my deputies was driving by, making their rounds about the town, and a young black woman named Tyresha came running out of the alley. She was wild, Tiberius. Insane. She's also homeless, and we think she witnessed what happened and it drove her mad. She was repeating a phrase that worries me. What was it? I asked. Cotton tore his eyes away from Delbert's body. He turned them on me. She kept saying, "It showed me the darkness." But when my deputy tried to calm her down, she screamed that the only way to stay alive was to eat the flesh. Then she attacked him. She tried to bite him. He's okay. He got her cuffed and carried her off to Eldridge Hospital. He's there with her now. I didn't like that bit of information. Have you let Alyssa know about that? Cotton grunted. Yeah, I told her. She's going to examine Tyresha when she's done cleaning up here. Alyssa Hart is the coroner and medical examiner. She chooses not to drive a normal coroner's van to collect bodies from a scene. Instead, she drives a 66 VW bus painted white and powder blue. She's quirky like that. Some folks turn to drugs to stay sane in this dark world. Alyssa uses whimsy. She parked the bus at the entrance to the alley. She got out and walked over to us. She looked at the body, then looked at me, and then Cotton. Okay, she said. That's new. Any idea what could have caused something like this? Cotton asked. He was a man of few words and carried himself with a battle-won confidence that made him seem taller and bigger than he actually was. No, Alyssa said. She held a flashlight of her own. She switched it on and began a closer inspection. When she looked at Delbert's fingers, she groaned. Oh, man, the poor guy. How is it possible he could have been alive after something like this happening to him? Cotton asked. Alyssa took a long moment to inspect the body before answering. Finally, she said, I'm sure his organs were severely damaged, so death should have been instantaneous. But clearly it wasn't. The only way I can explain this is that this twisting together of body and brick happened over a period of minutes. That would have been excruciating physically and would have been crushing psychologically. I'll know more when I get all this back to my lab. Just then, Alyssa's two assistants, Jane and Kevin, arrived. Jane was short and had a dark sense of humor. Kevin was tall and lean and fussy. He approached life with a seriousness that had no room for jokes. They both carried powerful spotlights that, when switched on, lit up the scene in an antiseptic glare that brought the grotesque scene into stark focus. If Jane was shocked at the strangeness of the scene, she didn't show it. Instead, she said, Well, I'm not a fan of this style of graffiti. It lacks whimsy. Kevin frowned at Jane's comment. Then he frowned at the scene. After a long moment, he frowned at me and Cotton and Alyssa. We'll need to cut out a section of the wall around the body and the pavement here where the entrails have fallen. Alyssa was a great medical examiner, in part because she knew she didn't have to have all the answers, and she surrounded herself with smart, open-minded professionals. She understood that collaboration was always good while conducting investigations, especially the kind we deal with. Any thoughts on how this could have happened? This is clearly not anything natural, Kevin offered. So I'm going with that it is some kind of technology, though I can't guess what that would be at the moment. It's possible that there is some kind of tech out there that would do this, Jane said, but I don't think your run-of-the-mill bad guy is going to have it. This is Nevermore Hollows, I said. There's nothing run-of-the-mill here, especially our bad guys. Jane smirked. Touché, Mr. Poe. Speaking of touching, you ever going to let me take you out on a date? Jane not only had a dark sense of humor, but she was also very direct. She'd asked me out a couple of times already. She was attractive and smart, but not my type. I'd always politely shrugged off her advances, but this time was different because there was an audience. I didn't want to seem rude, so I fumbled the answer like a drunken running back. I got a lot going on, I stammered. Jane winked at me. I gotcha. You're not ready to be with a woman like me, but I think I'm wearing you down. I'll have you soon. She then turned and headed back to the van she and Kevin had arrived in, leaving me red-faced. When they were out of earshot, Cotton said, I've never seen you go on a date, Tiberius. Jane's smart, funny, and easy on the eyes. Why not at least go for coffee? It's not that I don't like dates, but that I'm always working a case. And the kinds of cases I work are, shall we say, stranger and deadlier than most. See, my name is Tiberius Poe, and I am a private detective who works the kinds of cases that make the most fearless exorcists cower in the corner and beg for mommy. And if I'm to be completely honest, I'm drawn to someone that I've been too uncomfortable to pursue. We have a special kind of relationship, and I fear that should I ask this woman for something more, it'll ruin the vibe. If you've listened to any of my past cases, you don't need to be a detective to figure out who it is. Alyssa and Cotton exchanged a knowing look. Then Alyssa asked, So, how is Marlene? Marlene Bloom is my business partner. She's cute as hell, and she'll kick your ass. She wears nerd glasses and always has a horror novel within reach. She started out as my secretary after she met an old gypsy woman in the Arizona desert who used a cracked crystal ball and told her to come to Nevermore Hollows to protect me. From what, neither of us know. The craziest part of the story is that neither of us knew the other even existed. But a couple of years later, here we are, business partners in my PI firm. She's good, I said. I called her after you called me, and I'll pick her up when I leave here, and we'll get started trying to figure out what all this is. I was about to try and awkwardly change the subject when I noticed that Cotton was now standing at just the right angle to block the feeble light from the bulb above and behind him. His shadow fell across a portion of the twisted corpse, and I saw something interesting. Hey, look where Cotton's shadow falls. The part of the wall that contained the twisting of bricks and body glowed an eerie green. It reminded me of the glow-in-the-dark stars you could buy at a toy store and stick to your walls or ceiling. As we watched, the color changed from the eerie green to an electric blue. "Well, that concerns me," Alyssa said. She took a cautious step back. It wasn't like her to show any kind of fear. "What is it?" Cotton asked. Alyssa glanced around the alley. "I'm not convinced this scene hasn't been exposed to some kind of radiation." Cotton, Kevin, and I backed away from the corpse. "Are we going to be okay?" Cotton asked. Alyssa gave us a sober look. "Ordinarily, I'd say yes. We haven't been here on this scene long enough, but if this is some kind of radiation that did this to Delbert, I can't be sure." We all looked upon the twisted corpse. We were all thinking the same thing. We didn't want to end up like poor Delbert. Kevin broke the silence with his matter-of-fact reasoning. "We have a Geiger counter in the van. I'll go get it. That will tell us if it is radiation or not." Jane returned carrying a saw that would be used to cut Delbert free. "Maybe we'll all get superpowers," she said. When no one laughed at her dark joke, she doubled down. "Boy, you folks don't have a sense of humor. I hope you become mutants." "We also have some radiation suits in the van. I'll get them for us." "We only need 3, Alyssa said. "Tiberius and Cotton won't be staying." Cotton and I started to protest, but she cut us off. "There's nothing you can do here at the moment, and there's no use increasing any exposure to whatever this is. Let us cut the body out and take it back to my lab. If this is a hot zone, we'll take proper precautions." "Shouldn't we take some radiation pills or something?" I asked, remembering all those 1950s sci-fi movies I watched as a kid. You know, as a precaution. Alyssa had taken to carrying a backpack loaded with the items she might need at a crime scene. She slipped it off her shoulders and rummaged around inside. She pulled out a couple small packages. She tossed them to me and Cotton. "Take these pills. It's potassium iodide. The instructions are on the back of the package, and I'll let you know what I find." Cotton and I left the alley. When we got back onto the sidewalk, he turned to me. "What are you thinking? You said you didn't know, but I sense you do." I shrugged. "I honestly don't know," I replied. "But, Cotton, for some reason this seems familiar." Cotton gave me a surprised look. "A man melted into a brick wall is familiar to you?" "Yeah, but I don't know why. My gut tells me I've heard about this kind of thing before. I just can't remember where." Cotton headed toward his 1955 Willis 4x4 pickup, which he had lovingly restored to its full rugged glory, and that he used as his patrol vehicle. "I know you have your own way of investigating. I'll move forward with my own investigation, but let's make sure we keep each other in the loop." I headed to my 1972 Chevy Blazer K1. "Will do, Cotton. Be safe. My gut tells me that this case is going to get weird." Cotton stopped midway to climbing into his truck and shot me a concerned look. "Aren't all the cases around here weird?" I nodded. "They are, but this one, it's gonna be weirder." Cotton let his concerned gaze linger on me a bit, then said, "Damn." He finished climbing into his truck and drove off. I glanced back over my shoulder down the alleyway. It looked like the gullet of an ancient leviathan, just waiting to swallow its next victim. My phone gave a soft ring. It was a message from Marlene. She was up and showered and waiting for me. I climbed into my Blazer and drove across town to her place. Marlene lives in a craftsman-style home on a quiet street. Even though it was 1:30 in the morning, she was sitting on the steps to her porch, looking as refreshed as if she had slept a full 8 and had 2 cups of joe. She was wearing her usual jeans, sneakers, and t-shirt. This one was black with the logo for the Pixies, which was one of her favorite punk bands. Her ensemble was topped off by her nerd glasses. She stood and walked over to the curb. I can't help thinking about cats when she walks. I can't explain it. She just moves with a confident, casual grace that is so cat-like. She slid into the seat next to me. What kind of gnarly death are we investigating this time? Give me the gory details. I pulled away from the curb. Delbert Suggs got himself melted into the brick wall in the alley between Romero's and Sabbath Black's. Marlene has one of the most flexible minds I've ever encountered, which is necessary to have if you're a paranormal detective. You can't afford to belt your brain into a mental straitjacket if you're going to work the kinds of cases that involve vampires, zombies, and lab-created monsters. I finished bringing her up to speed. Well, she said, that had to be a disturbing scene. I nodded. It was. Is Sweetie Petey okay? I shot her a side glance. Who's Sweetie Petey? I'm disappointed in you, Tiberius. That's Delbert's pet rat, the one he keeps on a leash. I know about the rat, I said, but I didn't know he had a name. Sweetie isn't a he, Marlene replied. Delbert was drunk on hooch the night that he found Sweetie and made it his pet. Poor Delbert assumed that the rat was a he, but it's definitely a she, and he just never changed the name. Sounds confusing, I said. Marlene shrugged. People around here are quirkier than most. I just accept it and move on. We drove down Main Street, which was lit up with strands of white lights on the trees that lined the sidewalks and from the antique-style street lamps. Nevermore Hollows is a beautiful town. If you were to drive through, you'd think you'd stepped back 60 years to simpler times. But if you've been following any of my stories for the past few years, you know that this town may look healthy, but actually has a paranormal cancer that is eating away at its soul like a tumor eats at the brain. So, to recap, she said, dead guy melted into the wall, missing pet rat, strange green and blue glow that may or may not be radiation of some sort? That about sums up what we know so far, I said. But I don't think the missing rat has anything to do with the case. It probably just ran away. The glow of the main street lights was dimmed by Marlene's smile. I'm just stating the facts, partner. I returned her smile. Well, the facts are more unusual than what we've come across in the past cases, I said. Considering you're fairly new to the PI game, where do you think we should start to find the answers? I've been a PI since I was 21. Yeah, that's young for a PI, but let's just say, without going too deeply into my childhood, that I had experiences as a child that gave me the skills I needed at 21 to be successful as an investigator who specializes in strange and paranormal cases. Marlene, as smart as she is, comes from a different background that she has not yet fully shared with me. But what I do know is that she has never had any experience in investigations prior to becoming my secretary and later my partner. I've been teaching her with each case we work. and she has a knack for it." She considered my question for a beat, then said, "I think we need to loop Tobias in on this one." This statement made my heart skip a beat. "No," I said, a bit too emphatically. "You're going to have to visit him eventually, Tiberius." "I'm not ready," I said, "and I don't think he is either." "You haven't seen your brother since he moved here from Atlanta," she admonished, "and the last time you saw him was after his surgery." For those of you who have been following my adventures, I've never spoken of Tobias because, well, there was no need to. But because of Marlene's nudging, you now know that I have a brother. In fact, he's my twin, but we are not identical. I got the Cherokee gene passed down from my mom's side of the family. He got the Scots-Irish gene passed down from our dad. I have darker skin, long black hair, and sharper features, and he, surprisingly, is fair-skinned with freckles and red hair. Genetics can be just as weird as the paranormal. There was a good reason I was hesitant to see him, though up until last year we'd always been close, like most twins are. See, he was a detective on the Atlanta police force. He had worked his way up from patrolman to detective in only 10 years. He'd been kind of a rock star at it, too. He had solved more cases than anyone in the history of the force. Of course, we collaborated all the time, helping each other. Because of the things that happened to us in our childhood, he too has a flexible mind, but those things are stories for another time. What caused our awkward estrangement was that last year he was shot in the back, and it left him paralyzed from the waist down. I was by his side through his 4 surgeries, but when he'd been given the news that he would never be able to walk again, he became withdrawn and told me he needed space and to not contact him until he was ready. It had been a year, and I'd not heard from him. In fact, it was Marlene that told me he'd moved to town last month. "I think you make now the time," Marlene said. "I'm trying to honor his wish, Marlene. Besides, what makes you think now is the time?" "Well, he moved here, didn't he? Seems like maybe he's wanting to be close to you, so man up and take the first step." I winced. She might be right. Tobias never does anything on a whim. Every action he'd ever taken was methodical. It was what made him a great detective. So if he moved to Nevermore Hollows when he could have moved closer to our parents, and yes, I have parents and they are still alive and live in Savannah, then it could be seen as an invitation. "Okay," I said, "but later. We're going back to the crime scene to see how they're doing chipping Delbert out of the wall and to look for more clues." When we got back to the alley, Alyssa and her team had set up a perimeter. I was surprised to see they weren't wearing the hazmat suits. Marlene and I stepped beyond the barrier and into the alley. Alyssa saw us and motioned us over. "I take it this isn't a hot zone?" I said. "Oh, it was clearly a hot zone when the incident happened," she replied. "But now the levels are safe." "How can the levels go from hot zone to safe so quickly?" Marlene asked. "Very good question," Alyssa replied. "It shouldn't have. Any radiation hot enough to melt bone and brick should still be so strong it would fry our insides. It makes no sense." I was about to tell her that Marlene and I were going to wander around looking for any clues that might shed some light on this madness. But Kevin let out a shocked curse and jumped back from the wall. He'd been using chalk to draw an outline around the melted part of wall so that Jane could use the large electric saw to cut Delbert free. "Gross," Jane said, and not in the cool way. Marlene and Alyssa and I stepped closer so that we could see their cause of alarm. There was movement under Delbert's arm that protruded from the wall. As we watched, Sweetie Petey, Delbert's pet rat, poked its head from under the bicep. It began squeaking as if it was in terrible pain. It took us a beat to realize what we were seeing. But then, realization struck us like an angry rattlesnake. Sweetie Petey's body was fused into Delbert's bicep. The poor creature was terrified and clearly in pain and trying to claw itself free. Though Alyssa deals with death, she is a sweet, cheerful woman with a kind smile and a big heart. She doesn't like to see anyone or anything suffer. She quickly grabbed a syringe and vial of morphine from her backpack and with a grimace administered a lethal dose to Sweetie Petey, thus relieving it of its pain. We all stood silent for a heartbeat as we processed this gruesome turn of events. Finally, Alyssa said, "We have to find out what did this before it happens to anyone else." Marlene and I spent the next 15 minutes scouring the alley for clues, but found none. We excused ourselves and got back in my blazer. Marlene was in deep thought. "This case isn't fun, Tiberius. I know we've seen some gnarly, gruesome things, but that was disturbing." We rode around for a while, discussing what we knew so far, trying to figure out what to do. Then my phone rang. It was Alyssa. When I answered, she said, "There's been another incident down by Fike Pier, and it's the nastiest thing I've ever seen." I told her we were on our way and hung up. It didn't take us long to get there because we were already near the bay. We parked and walked across the dunes and onto the beach. Fike Pier jutted out into the dark ocean like a skeletal finger pointing into the void. A spot a few yards away was cordoned off with police tape strung up from poles stuck in the sand. Someone had set up a couple portable lights. Alyssa and Cotton were standing near a dark lump on the sand. Marlene and I walked up and stood beside them. The body was that of a young woman. It was so twisted and distorted that it caused the acid in my stomach to rise into my throat. I choked it down. Like many of us who investigate murders, Marlene has a dark sense of humor. In fact, hers is probably more refined than most. It's not that she doesn't respect the dead, it's that she chooses to defend her sanity by having a humor shield. But upon seeing the body lying in the sand, her only response was a gasp. Just like Delbert, the body was distorted, twisted, and looked almost as if it had been melted. Delbert's had been fused into the bricks. This body was fused with a section of the sandy beach. Delbert's pet rat, Sweetie Petey, had become part of his body. This body was fused with a couple different species of fish and a half-dozen crabs. Fused to her head was an octopus. From her cheek a tentacle squirmed, questioning, as if reaching out for help. That's when I noticed that some of the crabs were also alive. The whole mess had that strange green and electric blue radiation glow. Finally, Marlene found her voice. "I take it that because you two aren't wearing hazmat suits, we're not going to get irradiated. No, Alyssa said. The levels here are also acceptable. Cotton had been a soldier. War had shaped him spiritually and physically. He'd seen dark things in war, and he'd seen even darker things as sheriff of Nevermore Hollows. But it was clear that the sight of this woman's body disgusted him on a profound level. He removed his Stetson and ran a hand through his hair. What's causing this? Is it paranormal or is it something else? I know there's radiation involved, but I'm not sure that this is what's causing the fusing of the bodies with the other things, Alyssa replied. As far as answering your question, Cotton, I don't know of any natural thing that would do this. And you know what Sherlock Holmes would say, Marlene added. When you remove the impossible, what's left, no matter how improbable, is the truth, I said. I loved that character. It was one of the reasons I became a PI. It's also a concept that helped me succeed where other detectives and PIs fail. Other investigators will take this Holmesian concept only as far as the five senses. In any given case, they look at the clues that they can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. And sure, this concept works to a fair degree of success when used in that manner. But if there is a case that has clues that point to something beyond the five senses, they toss this concept out. And I think that's why a great many cases remain unsolved. You've got to follow the clues no matter where they take you. If it takes you to the supernatural, you go there. You don't stop like most investigators do. But I choose to embrace the Sherlock Holmes idea to its fullest. My very first cases seemed like normal run-of-the-mill cases, but when the clues couldn't be explained with either of my five senses, I began asking questions like, what outside the unseeable realm could have done this? And that's how I ended up cracking a child abduction case that involved a fairy that sold children's blood to elites in Hollywood. At that moment, my mind was completely open, and that allowed all kinds of creatures, cryptids, spirits, and monsters to walk in. As I considered all this, the ghost of the idea that had been haunting my memory materialized. The two biggest clues about what had caused these two unfortunate deaths were right in my face. The fusion of the bodies with their surroundings and the creatures was one, and the strange radiation glow was the other. I might understand what is happening, I said, but I don't know how it's happening. Cotton motioned for me to continue. Go on, he said. I wasn't ready to reveal what I thought. Before I say anything, I need to meet with someone who can verify my theory. Well, get on with it, Cotton said. He glanced back down at the writhing mass of human and sea creatures. Before anyone else dies like this. As if on cue, Cotton's phone rang. He answered, and after listening for a moment, he said, Go ahead and secure the scene. I'm on my way. And then he hung up. Cotton is a cool cat. He very rarely shows his emotions, but it was clear he was getting ticked. That was Deputy Rose, he said. She just rode up on a gruesome scene where some animals are all fused together with one another. It's just up the road near the dairy farm. He shot a glance at Alyssa. Tiberius and Marlene and I will go and investigate that while you finish up here. With this information, I was able to make a deduction. I know that we found Delbert's body earlier, but I think this woman was the first victim, Then I'd bet the animals up the road were next, and Delbert was the most recent one. How do you figure that? Alyssa asked. I'm starting to think that whatever is doing this came from the sea, I said. It came ashore here, killed this poor woman, then hurt the animals up the road, then into the town where it got Delbert. Everyone considered my observation. Then Alyssa said, "The logistics do make sense. It seems like whatever this thing is, it's following the road through the countryside and through town. We've got to find this thing and put a stop to it, whatever it is." Marlene and Cotton and I walked back across the beach and to our vehicles in silence. Cotton told us to follow him, and we rode about 5 minutes up the road and came to a roadblock that had been set up by Deputy Rose. We parked and made our way to the scene. Upon seeing what the deputies had cordoned off, Marlene said, "Oh, those poor animals." Cotton grunted in disgust. I could only grimace. Standing almost directly center of the road was a large buck deer. Protruding from its side was a cow. But these animals weren't dead. They were alive, and their unfortunate fusion made them look like a monstrous two-headed beast. One of the deer's antlers poked through the cow's neck, which restricted both heads from freely moving. The deer's eyes were wild with fear. The cow's eyes were glassy and sad. The deer snorted a terrified whine as we approached. The cow gave a long, mournful moan. It heard us walking up and tried to turn toward us, but its 8 legs refused to work in harmony, so it stumbled and almost fell. The headlight beams from our cars spotlighted the sickening mess, and the strobing emergency lights caused the scene to jitter into and out of focus. Blue lights turned the creature into an ominous shadow. Red lights splashed over it and brought blood-colored detail. Sheriff Mosley mumbled a curse as we stepped forward. He pulled his .45 from its holster and fired 2 shots, one into each of the heads, thus relieving the animals from their torture. He turned to me and Marlene. "I'll handle this. I need you to figure out what is doing this and stop it before anyone else or anything else ends up like this." I nodded, shot another grim look at the poor creature. Because of the way the 2 animals had been fused, it didn't fall over. Instead, all 8 of its legs had collapsed under it. It looked like a nightmare made real. When we were back in the Blazer, Marlene said, "I've seen some pretty terrible things over the past few years, but what we're seeing tonight is the worst." I nodded. "Yeah, it takes disturbing to a new level. I think it's time we go see Nellie." Nellie Van Sickle is a guy I met a couple of years back when I was working a case involving a Tataclea, which is a cryptid that is part of the Native American lore in the Pacific Northwest. Tataclea roughly translates to owl woman monster. They are nasty creatures, and the one I fought nearly ate my soul, and it would have been successful if it wasn't for Nellie coming to my rescue. He's a paranormal researcher, a real one, not one of those whack jobs you see on TV or on the internet. I'd kept in touch with him over the years, and after he realized that Nevermore Hollows is a hotbed of paranormal and strange activity, he moved here to further his research. He lived out in the boonies on a farm he'd bought and turned into a secure compound. He's not one of those anti-government nuts or anything like that. Part of the reason for the security is to keep unwanted people out, but the real defenses are against the supernatural, especially elves. Most people think that elves are these small, pointy-eared, incredibly smart creatures. That's a lie. They're basically the raccoons of the spiritual realm. Those little bastards are nasty and will steal you blind if you're not careful. It was 3:30 in the morning when we arrived at the gate that blocked the entrance to the property. The gate was made of iron, which is harmful to many spirits and supernatural creatures. There was a hand-painted sign affixed to the gate that read, "For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land." To the supernatural beings that haunt Nevermore Hollows, that's a big enter-at-your-own-risk statement. Beside the driveway, there was a metal pole stuck in the ground that had a camera and a call box attached to it. I drove up to it and rolled down my window. Before I could push the call button, Nellie's voice came through the speaker. "Tiberius? Is that you?" "In the flesh," I said. "I hope I didn't wake you." "You know better than that," he said. "And you know I gotta ask." He paused. I knew what he was doing. Nellie knew that a lot of creatures had the ability to shapeshift or mimic humans. He was testing me to see if I was really who I said I was. "I know you do," I said. "So ask." There was a pause. Then, "Count Chocula or Frankenberry?" "Well, that's a trick question," I replied. "You know Fruity Pebbles is the best cartoon cereal." Nellie laughed. "Yeah, it is. Come on in." "As far as the security challenge goes, I expected something a bit spookier," Marlene said. I shrugged. What can I say? We bonded over cereal. The gate swung open and I drove through. The road was a single paved lane that wound through a section of dense woods and through a couple of hills and vales. It ended at a 2-story cabin that was lit up with warm, welcoming lights. We parked and walked up onto the wraparound porch, and Nellie opened the door before we could knock. Nellie is a wiry man who is bald but has a long, dark beard. He wore glasses and a Halo video game t-shirt and cut-off camouflage shorts and combat boots. He's a ball of energy, and he grabbed me in a man-hug and said, "Welcome, Brother Tiberius. It's been a long time. You look well." He turned to Marlene and shook her hand. "I'm Nellie. Wonderful to meet you." He then ushered us through a spacious living room and into a brightly lit kitchen. The air was redolent with the aroma of fresh brewed coffee. He motioned for me and Marlene to sit at the counter and poured us each a cup. It was wonderful. "I'd forgotten how good your coffee is," I said. "I'm a bit of a coffee snob," he said. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Marlene has a way of getting to the point. Before I could reply, she said, "We have some wacko or crazy creature melting people into sand and brick walls. The victims even have animals fused to their bodies. And a poor woman named Tyresha has gone crazy. Tiberius here says you are the guy who can help us make sense of it." One of the lovable things about Nellie is his excitement for knowledge. He was mid-sip of his coffee when Marlene described our case. His eyes shot wide, and he set his cup down so fast that it splashed some of the brew onto the counter. When Nellie was excited, he was capable of rapid-fire data downloads. The words spilled out of him. "What?" he said. "That's fascinating. You say melted and fused? Which is it, melted or fused? Those are important distinctions that will help me help you. And animals were involved, right? Were any of them alive? The animals or the victims?" Then he realized he was speaking very fast and stopped. "Sorry," he said. "Too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Let's start with this. Melted or fused?" Marlene and I exchanged a glance. I nodded at her to continue. Fused, she said. That's more accurate than melted. And the human victims were dead when we arrived on the scene, I added. But it seems at least one of them was alive for a few minutes after being fused into a brick wall. But the animals were alive, even though they were fused to the victims. Uh-huh, Nellie responded. Gotcha. And the glow, you said it was green and blue? Electric blue and glow-in-the-dark green, Marlene clarified. Nellie tilted his head in thought. Blue doesn't make sense, but the green does. He turned and walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, which was lined with bookshelves. He snatched a book and came back into the kitchen. He laid it on the counter and opened it. He took another long sip of coffee, then began rapidly flipping pages until he found what he was looking for. Ha! He said. Here we go. He slid the book around so that Marlene and I could read the pages. One of the pages was filled with a black and white picture of a U.S. Navy destroyer. The other page was full of dense text. Marlene read the caption under the picture. The USS Eldridge? Isn't that the ship from the Philadelphia experiment? Nellie nodded. Yes, it is. Ever since I'd seen the condition of Delbert's body, how it was fused into the brick wall of the alley, something had been scratching around in the back of my mind like an undead corpse trying to claw free from the grave. When Nellie showed us this picture, the corpse scrambled free. My eyes shot wide. You don't think? Nellie gave a wide, excited smile. I do. Marlene frowned. I know the lore about the experiment. During World War II, the U.S. Navy tried to make a ship unseen to radar by using electromagnetics, but there was some kind of failure that got some folks killed. I get all that, but I'm clueless as to why you two think it has anything to do with our case. As way of explanation, I stayed locked in with Nellie's train of thought. That's not all the lore, I said. The conspiracy theory is that the goal was not to make it unseen to radar, but was instead an attempt to teleport the ship. Nellie picked up the thought from there. If you could teleport a ship into and out of battle in the blink of an eye, it would have won the war sooner and given the United States a powerful technology that would revolutionize the world. But, I added, they weren't just playing around with creating new scientific technologies. They were mixing all that with occult magical practices. Just like the Nazis were doing, Nellie said. Well, that I do know about, Marlene said. The Nazis used black magic and science to create some of their weapons. Yes, they did, Nellie said. They were mixing magic and tech. That's been proven beyond dispute. There was a moment when we all took sips of coffee and considered what we'd learned. Are we saying that everything we've seen tonight, the deaths, Tyresha's madness, and the animals back on the road are related to the Philadelphia experiment? I asked. Nellie savored another sip before responding. I think so. We know that the experiment on the Eldridge went terribly wrong. Sailors were fused into the bulkhead of the ship. Other sailors went insane. This is exactly what we're seeing here. There may not be any lore about the sailors being fused to sea life or rats, but that can be easily explained. How so? Marlene asked. Nellie considered for a moment. Then, well, when it all went wonky on the ship, there were no rats or sea life close enough to the victims. Marlene stirred some more sugar into her coffee. She liked hers a little sweeter than Nellie and I liked ours. As she stirred, she said, Okay, it sounds like we're on the right track, but the big question would be, is there an intelligence behind the attacks? Nellie leaned against the counter, coffee cup in his left hand, and he tugged at his beard with his right. "Wow," he said. "Great question." When he paused to consider his answer, I said, "I'm not sure we can answer that, at least not now." "Why not?" Marlene asked. I shrugged. "Well, the deaths seem random, and as far as we know, there seems to have been no purpose. We don't have any proof that the two victims knew each other. Nothing was taken from the bodies that we can ascertain." "I see," Marlene said. "No discernible motive." "Exactly," I responded. "An intelligence would seem to have a motive. I don't see one here yet, but maybe as we continue to investigate, maybe a motive will be revealed." "Maybe it has already been revealed," Nellie said. "Wasn't that poor woman, Tyresha, babbling about something showed her the darkness?" "Yes," I said. "The deputy said that she kept repeating, 'It showed me the darkness.' And she said that it told her the only way to live was to eat the flesh." "Well, that seems like an intelligence to me," Marlene replied. "Tyresha's madness is another clue that we're on the right track," Nellie said. "Some people believe that the ship didn't just disappear and instantaneously transport to another location, but that the ship skipped through another dimension, and whatever the sailors saw in that dimension drove them insane." Nellie drained the last of his coffee. He was bright-eyed and full-on jittery with caffeine and the excitement of the hunt. "If you guys are okay with me helping, I'd love to dig into this more." My phone rang. It was Cotton. I put him on speaker and he said, "We have a video of the attack on Delbert. It's from a camera from the store across the street that just happened to be pointed toward the alley." "Let me guess," I said. "It's a mist or a cloud of some sort." Cotton paused before answering. "How did you know?" "Never mind. You and Marlene can tell me later. But yes, it's kind of like a fog that has that glow-in-the-dark green color. The footage shows that it was floating down the middle of Main Street. We can see that Delbert was sitting on a bench, saw the damn thing coming toward him, and got up and headed down the alley. The fog or mist or whatever it is reacted to his movement and followed him into the alley." This seemed to confirm that the mist had at least some limited sentience. "So you think that the mist moved with intent?" I asked. "I do," Cotton said. "I assume you think this lets us know it is sentient." "We do," I said. "Well, how the hell do we defeat a sentient mist?" Cotton asked. "I don't know yet, but I'm with a guy who might be able to help figure that out. We'll get back to you as soon as we can." I hung up and Nellie poured another cup of coffee. "You guys go find the thing," he said. "I'll find a way to defeat it." "I'm good with that," I said. "Marlene and I will circle back around with Alyssa and see what she has found while examining the bodies. Maybe she's learned something there that will help." As Nellie walked us to the door, he said, "I've got an idea I'm not ready to share, but when you get hold of Alyssa, ask her if the bodies of the victims have any electromagnetic charge to them." Marlene loved what we did for a living. She flashed Nellie a smile. "How cryptic. I love it." I held the door open for her and said, "You do realize we're dealing with death and destruction here, right?" She gave me an admonishing look. "Of course I do, Tiberius. It's very unfortunate, but that doesn't mean I can't try to enjoy the thrill of the chase." That was just another statement that made me think Marlene had a cat's soul. Considering we now had a plan, We thanked Nellie and left him to his own part of the investigation. As I turned west onto the state road, I called Alyssa and asked her if she could determine the times of death on our 2 human victims. "I'm going to say around 11 p.m. last night for the woman on the beach," she said. "And I put Delbert around 1 a.m., and the video Cotton found supports that." "That supports my theory that the girl on the beach was first," I said, "then the cow and the deer, then Delbert." We spent a couple minutes bringing Alyssa up to speed on what we were thinking, and I asked her the question about the victims' bodies being electromagnetically charged. Alyssa was nonplussed. She's seen too many strange things to be surprised that we had linked these deaths to the Philadelphia experiment. "Well, all of us are electromagnetically charged on a small level, relatively speaking," she said, "but yes, the fact that they are slightly irradiated and emitting that green and blue glow made me curious. It's only been a little over an hour since I got the bodies back to my lab, but I have been conducting a battery of tests, and to my surprise, they are more electromagnetically charged than normal, like triple what is normal, but it seems to be dissipating by the hour. How does that fit into any of this?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," I responded. Marlene sat up straighter in her seat. "Wait a minute," she said. "It's clear the path this thing is taking is straight through town, right?" "It seems so," I said. "Why?" "It went straight up the state road from the bay, through town via Main Street, which turns back into the state road." Alyssa got there a beat before me. "The circus," she said. "If it keeps on this trajectory, it will pass the fairgrounds where the circus is set up." We had already deduced that the mist possessed a level of intelligence, and that it would attack animals and people. I had come to believe that it was drawn to the electromagnetic fields our bodies emanate. We had been lucky that it was the middle of the night and that the only people on Main Street had been Delbert and Tyrecia, but if the mist continued its trajectory, it would pass right by the fairgrounds. That meant that the circus folks were in danger. I gave Alyssa Nellie's number and asked her to call him and collaborate with him on a solution. Then I hung up and sped through the stoplight at the east end of Main Street, past the darkened storefronts, intending to get to the fairgrounds, but slammed on my brakes at the west end of Main Street when a man ran into the streets. His hair was wild, his eyes were dull and unfocused. He was pale and his mouth hung open. A thick rivulet of saliva ran from the corner of his mouth. I honked my horn and yelled at him to get out of the way, but Marlene said, "He's glowing." I hadn't noticed it because it was faint, and I was too worried about getting to the fairgrounds. But as I focused on the poor guy, I could make out a faint greenish glow around him. I switched off the headlights, and sure enough, it was easier to make out. It was like a putrid aura. It also occasionally crackled with that electric blue color we'd seen on Delbert. I stepped out of the blazer and ran over to him. "Sir, tell me what happened." He seemed not to notice me, but his lips were moving. I leaned closer and heard him mumbling, "It showed me the darkness. I'm not of the living. It showed me the darkness. I'm not of the living." I grabbed his shoulder and gave him a shake. "What does that mean?" He turned his dull eyes on me. I'd seen eyes like this before when I was visiting Morning Star Sanitarium. They were the eyes of madness. I got a shiver when he said, "The mist. It floated around me, showed me terrible things. It showed me the darkness. I'm not of the living. I gave him another shake. Which way did it go? Do you know? He slowly, almost absent-mindedly raised a finger and pointed down the road that led out of town. That way, he mumbled. Toward the circus. It feels their energy. It wants to show them the darkness. Make them not of the living. Then, faster than I could have expected, he reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked me toward him. It was easier to do than you think because one of the ways I honor my Cherokee heritage is that sometimes I wear my hair long and in a braid. He had a death grip on my braid and was pulling me toward him. As he did, he said, It told me the only way to live is to eat the flesh. He sunk his teeth deep into my shoulder. Hot pain shot up my neck. I grabbed a handful of his hair and pulled at the same time I punched him in the temple. He growled in pain but let me go and stumbled back. He shook his head and grinned maniacally at me. My blood covered his lips and chin. Marlene ran up behind him and whacked him on the head with the butt of her pistol. He dropped onto the ground, and I used a pair of my handcuffs to secure him to a wrought iron bench on the sidewalk. Marlene and I got back in the Blazer and tore off toward the fairgrounds. Marlene did some calculations of the timeline. I don't think we're going to get there in time, Tiberius. I'd also done the math. I know. Call Cotton and bring him up to speed and tell him to send every deputy and first responder we have in this town to the circus. I roared past the town limits and into the countryside while Marlene updated Cotton. We rounded a curve and saw a pack of goats tearing into a horse. Even in the beam of my headlights, I could see that the goats had the faint green glow with the sparks of electric blue about them. They were also covered in the horse's viscera. It was a mild night, and our windows were down, and as we flew by, we could hear the goats were all bleating in unison. And I swear to you, it sounded almost human. And I'd be hard-pressed to deny that they were chanting, "Eat the flesh." 3 long minutes later, we could see the confetti-colored glow of the circus lights coming from the fairgrounds around the next curve. I prayed for heaven, but prepared for hell. We rounded the corner to circus-colored chaos. Though the circus had shut down for the night hours ago, many of the lights were still on. Yellow, red, blue, amber, and green lights blinked and chased each other. They washed over dozens of people stumbling around, clawing at their faces, and chasing and biting each other. As I drove onto the grounds, we could see a couple people that had become fused with some of the attractions. To our left, a skinny woman with a weathered face was fused to the ticket booth. The yellow lights under its eaves casting her eyes deep in shadows. To our right, a man with a mullet was melted into the side of an elephant that stood silently tied to a stake. The man was alive and crying. "Look over there," Marlene said, pointing toward the red and white striped big top tent. There was the mist. It was about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, floating 2 feet above the ground. A young woman was running from it, juking to the left and right in her attempt to escape, but the mist reacted to her every move, and to our horror, it overtook her. She screamed like a dying banshee. It curdled my blood. There were 5 long seconds. Then the mist moved on, and the woman lay on the ground, writhing in the throes of madness. She leaped up, her face a mask of insanity, and tore off after a middle-aged bald guy. He saw her crazy face and tried to run, but he was too old and too out of shape. She pounced on him and tore into his neck and face. Amongst the screaming chaos, I heard my phone ring. I snatched it from my pocket. It was Nellie. "Please tell me you have something." "I think I do," he said. "Alyssa just called me and updated me on her analysis of the victims' bodies. The fact that they are in an increased state of electromagnetism suggests that the mist is extremely charged." "Okay," I replied. "How does that help us defeat this thing?" Marlene chimed in. "Yeah, how do you defeat a cloud?" "We aren't going to try to defeat it," Nellie said. At least not now. We're going to contain it." I found that interesting and wondered why I hadn't thought of it. "I'm intrigued. What are you thinking?" "Faraday cage," Nellie said. I understood what a Faraday cage was. It essentially is a box you put electronics in that will stop them from receiving or emitting signals. This was brilliant. If, in fact, the mist was electromagnetically charged, using a Faraday cage would work as a trap and a way to contain it. At least in theory. "Well, that sounds great," I said, having to raise my voice above the screams of the fused and the mad. "But where do I get a Faraday cage big enough to contain this mist? It's the size of a car." Nellie didn't miss a beat. "The globe of death." I couldn't help but smile at the simplicity of Nellie's idea. I'd been at the circus the day before, and one of the attractions was a globe-shaped cage where a group of men and women flung themselves around in a swirling cyclone of souped-up dirt bikes and leather. It was loud, breathtakingly dangerous, and cool as hell. A Faraday cage needed two things: to be made of conductive metal and to be big enough to contain what you were trying to shield. The globe of death was made of steel, which is conductive, and was welded together in a mesh pattern, and it was big enough. It would work. Again, in theory, and that theory could only be tested by somehow getting the damn thing inside the cage. The mist was headed toward the petting zoo attraction. It was filled with goats, a donkey, a couple of cows, a half-dozen bunny rabbits, and surprisingly, a kangaroo. We'd already seen what the goats back down the road had done to the poor horse. We didn't need a petting zoo from hell to be running around eating people. But how in the hell was I supposed to get this cloud in the cage? Before I could come up with an answer, Marlene made a bold and careless move. She ran toward the mist, yelling at it, calling it names that I won't repeat here. Marlene doesn't hold any punches, and she really knows how to use words as a weapon, but I never heard her speak such language. The mist slowed, hovered a moment, then began moving in her direction. She took off running toward the globe of death. The mist followed, and it was picking up speed, but Marlene was faster and stayed ahead of it. I was also curious as to her plan once she got to the globe. Was she just going to politely hold the door open while the mist floated through to have a little looky inside? I did the only thing I could do. I ran to help her. I was closer to her than the mist, and I caught up with her within a few strides. As we ran, I said, "What do we do when we get to the cage?" She shot me a glance. "Motorcycle," she replied. I turned my attention to the cage. 3 of the hot-rodded dirt bikes were parked a few yards away from the attraction. I said a silent prayer that these bikes were the old-school kind that didn't need keys to start them. I was surprised that we made it to the bikes before being swallowed up into madness by the mist. I thanked God that the bikes were the kickstart kind. I sat astride one and shot a glance at the cloud. It was about 20 yards away and it was gaining fast. "What are you doing?" Marlene asked. "I assume you were going to try and lure the mist inside the cage with you on the bike," I said. "I'm not going to let that happen, so I'll do it." Marlene pulled on a helmet. It was bubblegum pink and had black devil horns. "Do you even know how to ride a bike, Tiberius?" A little." This was a lie. I'd ridden a bike only once in my life, and I'd crashed it into a ditch, and that was about 20 years ago. "You do remember that I have a motorcycle, don't you?" she replied. "I literally ride around the town on my Triumph. It makes sense for me to do this, Tiberius. Trust me." I didn't want to let her. The man in me is old school. I hold the door open for women. I call them ma'am, and I rush to their aid if they are in need. Now, Marlene is no Hollywood-style girl boss with unrealistic abilities, but she does know how to take care of herself. She also knows her limits. If she said she could do this, I would have to trust her. So I nodded. "What's your plan?" She winked at me and flashed me a smile. "I'll lure it inside, do a couple of spins, and ride back out the door." It was insane. But if anyone could pull off this crazy move, it was her. "Okay," I said. "I'll be ready to slam the door shut once you're out." She gave the bike a kick, and it roared to life. She spun around and headed straight toward the mist. It reacted by adjusting its trajectory to intersect with her. At the last heart-pounding moment, she slid around and took off toward the cage. The mist followed. Marlene adjusted her speed to allow it to get close, but not close enough to capture her. She shot up the ramp and inside the globe of death. She stopped to see if the mist would follow. I inched closer to the door, trying not to make myself a target. The mist didn't even hesitate. It was locked onto Marlene. It wanted her. It floated up the ramp and into the cage. Just as it entered, Marlene shot forward and around the cage, gaining speed as she circled the mist. The mist seemed confused. It jerked towards her, but she sped around behind it. The mist then twirled in that direction, but she had already circled around to the other side of the cage. Then, to my utter amazement, she rode the bike in a loop over the top of the mist, causing it to rise toward the top of the cage. She was momentarily upside down, and the devil horns on her helmet dipped into the edge of the mist. I was sure it was enough to make her lose her mind, but I could see that she was laughing. Not maniacally, but she was completely lost in the moment. So, yeah, maybe the mist wouldn't drive her insane because she was already there. She cycled down to the bottom of the cage, and I could see that her wild maneuver had been by design, so that the mist would rise up enough to allow her to slow down a bit and shoot out of the cage. I slammed the door closed while she was still in the air. I slapped the lever down to lock it in place and turned to see her slide the bike around so that she was facing me. Her green eyes were bright with excitement. Her smile could bring life to the dead. She cut the engine and stepped off the bike. She ran over to me as I stepped away from the cage. I expected the mist to try to ooze out between the holes in the steel mesh, but it just floated there in the center of the globe. It didn't move in any direction, just floating and glowing that creepy green glow with the occasional spark of electric blue. But those sparks were becoming dimmer, weaker. I don't know the science behind what was happening exactly, but I can guess that the mist had been drawing energy from the environment, and when inside the cage it was not able to draw any, or at least not enough to escape. After a few heartbeats, we could see that its green glow was dimming as well. We heard sirens in the distance. Mosley and the other first responders were on their way. The cleanup was difficult. The people who had been driven mad by the mist were literally feral. They clawed and bit and hissed and growled. They are now in Morningstar Sanitarium. And from what Dr. Sledgeboom, the director there, says about them, they will likely be there for the rest of their lives. The goats that were eating the horse were put down, and Alyssa was working with our town's veterinarian to do the autopsies on them to see what they may find. The folks who had been killed by the fusion into each other or into other objects were cut free, autopsied, and buried. The official story that Mosley put out was that the deaths were caused by a freak accident where people were electrocuted to death, and that the folks who ended up in Morningstar were suffering from PTSD due to witnessing this made-up disaster. We were done with the cleanup just as the sun peaked above the horizon. When Marlene and I got back into the blazer, she said, "A lot of lives were ruined by the events of this case, Tiberius." I pulled out of the fairgrounds and onto the county road. "More so than normal for us," I agreed. "And it was a bit more gruesome and stranger," she added. "I can't argue with that," I said. She hesitated a moment. I glanced at her. She was deep in thought. I found this interesting. Marlene is an extremely intelligent woman, but I rarely see her in such a pensive mood. She's well-read, self-educated in myriad topics, and is a lover of knowledge. That means for the most part she's informed enough on any given topic and self-aware enough to express her own opinions quickly and concisely. I've never even seen her lose a debate. And she prefers to use all this knowledge to express herself in quirky ways. Considering she was in this state, I knew she was about to say something profound. Finally, she said, "You need to go see him." I knew she was talking about Tobias, and I knew she was correct. It had been too long, and witnessing such human devastation only serves to drive the point home that family and friends are the most valuable things in the world, other than time and health. So we drove in silence to my brother's house on Wolfsbane Lane. I parked in front of his bungalow, which was surrounded by an immaculate yard dotted with flower gardens filled with cheerful confetti-colored flowers. To my surprise, Tobias was sitting on the porch in his wheelchair, enjoying the morning. When I sat for a beat too long before opening my door, Marlene said, "Don't be a wimp. I can't go up there by myself. He doesn't know me and might think I'm an intruder and shoot me dead." "You're being dramatic," I replied. "Tobias isn't a shoot-first kind of guy. Besides, he'd never shoot a lady." Marlene spread out her arms and motioned at what she was wearing. Black jeans, gray t-shirt with the logo for the punk band The Pixies, pink and white Converse shoes, nerd glasses. I don't think anyone would mistake this outfit as something a lady would wear. What if he thinks I'm some crackhead punk, or worse, a vampire? "You don't have the twitch of a crackhead," I said, "and no vampire would dress like that." Marlene looked offended. "What's that supposed to mean?" I gave a chuckle. Only that you have style. Most of the vampires I've run into over the years don't. She squinted her eyes at me. Lame, but I'll let you live. This time. We got out of the blazer and made our way up the walkway. When Tobias realized it was me, his eyes shot wide in surprise, but they weren't as wide as his smile. He reached up and gave me a hard pat on the shoulder. Glad to see you, brother. What an awesome surprise. Then he turned his attention on Marlene. And who is this beautiful creature? He always was the most confident of us, especially when it came to the opposite sex. And while some men would allow life in a wheelchair to steal their manliness and deflate their self-worth, Tobias was as confident as he'd ever been. I'm Marlene, and I'm a crackhead vampire. She delivered this line with a twinkle in her eyes and a playful smile. Tobias gave a pleased laugh. Easy on the eyes and funny, he said as he shook her hand. I felt a pang of jealousy at the way he was flirting with Marlene. I don't know why. Marlene and I aren't romantically involved, only business partners. But also, I get why he responded that way. She's got the kind of looks and personality that makes a good man want to be a better man. Tobias had always been one of those men that women gravitated to. He was good-looking, confident, charming, and witty, and I could tell from the way he was carrying himself now that nothing had changed. He still radiated all those qualities. I should have known my brother wouldn't let his injury change him. Then, after the introductions were complete, he motioned at the chairs beside him, and as the birds sang us a cheery morning song, we sat in the warm sun and told childhood stories to Marlene. It felt right, and it felt good, and for a moment, time stopped. The darkness of what we'd witnessed faded, and we were at peace.